How's it going? I'm going to talk a little bit today about the 8-string dobro. I've got an 8-string dobro, and I don't know how much interest there is about these things, but I think they're pretty cool. Essentially, I play 8-string steel guitar and Western swing and honky tonk and jazz, and I wanted to have an acoustic version, something I could play without plugging in. So I had this 8-string dobro made. Show you a little bit of what it sounds like. This is just going to be like a little 12-bar blues in the key of C, with some jazzier changes. So you'll notice that the sound is a little more complex than 6-string dobro. And so first I'll tell you a bit about the tuning. The tuning that's kind of standard for an 8-string dobro is G6, which basically the extra strings are going to be E's. So I have an E for a low string, and I have an E in the middle of the guitar too. So I've got E, G, B, D, E, G, B, D. Now, if you do some research on 8-string steel guitars, you're going to find out that there's a lot of different ways to tune it. And so when I say standard, that's really up for debate. A lot of people do like G6 on a 8-string dobro because then, you're already trying to figure out a new tuning. At least when you go to the 5th fret, it's still going to be a C chord. So it can make it a little less confusing if you're switching from 6-string dobro and tuned in G to 8-string. If you want to take a look at some different tunings, I recommend you do. One thing I do fairly often is tune the low string up to F instead of E. But there's this book. It's called Lap Steel Guitar by Andy Volk. I highly recommend it. It's dedicated to non-pedal steel guitar, and it has interviews with all the great players in non-pedal steel guitar, and they talk about their tunings. They list their tunings, and it's just very, very good resource for. It can be a little overwhelming, but it's neat to see how different people approach the tuning and how they approach the instrument. In terms of a steel guitar, the 8-string dobro by itself is almost not really an instrument. It's a custom thing, that's kind of, to me, it's designed to be like a steel guitar, like acoustic version of a steel guitar. So, a couple things to do when you're trying to learn how to play it. One of the things that's great about this tuning is that, to me, there's a ton of melody in the tuning. So when you first get started, I would just leave the bar in one place and get comfortable with the tuning and start messing around with what melodies you can get. And that's a good way to kind of familiarize yourself with the tuning a little bit. You'll notice me doing a lot of stuff that is based on the tuning. one thing about the instrument too is that the sixth note, what's nice about that, I say the sixth note because we're in the key of G. The E is the sixth note of the G major scale, so that's why it's called G6. Now, that also means that this thing works for an E minor. It's also an E minor 7 chord if you look at it that way. Those three strings are an E minor chord, and have another E minor chord up here, and then the extra notes, the D notes, are the 7th of that chord. So you've got an E minor 7, which means you can very easily get full minor chords, which you can't do on a standard 6-string dobro. So C major, C minor. So that's nice, although you can handle minor chords on a 6-string instrument too. You don't need an 8-string for that. If you're really getting into 8-string, it's probably, to me, the reason should be that you want to play Bob Wills and Hank Williams swing. The thing about the 6th chord is a 6th chord has this jazzy swing sound to it. So even if it's like anything I play on this thing sounds like swing, whether I like it or not. So that's a really cool thing. There are some differences in how you approach the instrument. I actually use a different bar for an 8-string. I use a bullet-tipped bar, and it's a little longer on the top than my shear-horn bar. Shear-horn bar is curved, and that allows me to do a couple things. One thing is that for some hammer-ons, I press down with the heel, and that kind of puts the nose of the bar up. And down here I can get some cool kind of Speedy West tricks. So you can't do that with the other bar. The bullet tip also helps me with some of these complex slants. I'm not a big fan of slanting, but there are a couple here that are really, really useful. You saw me probably do this a few times. And what I'm doing there is the nose of my bar is still on the 5th fret, getting the 3rd and 4th strings. But then on the 6th string, I'm able to flatten that one. So I get basically 4th fret on the 6th string and 5th fret on the 4th and 3rd strings. So the bullet actually enables me to slant the low note down and keep the top 2 the same, and that gives me, this chord is really useful. It can be a diminished chord or a dominant 7 chord or even a minor 6 chord depending on how you use it. That sounds weird, but if you math it out, it actually works. So if I'm in C, then this is an F7. So that can be the 4 chord. And I can go up a fret or 2 frets to get the 5 chord. Also works as a diminished chord if I wanted a sharp 1 diminished, which I'll do a progression that's a 1, sharp 1 diminished, minor 2, 5, which is a pretty standard jazz progression. That's pretty handy. Or sharp 4 diminished is another place where that comes into play. So after the 4 chord, sharp 4 diminished, back to the root. So that's pretty handy. I can also use the same technique on the strings 2, 3, and 4 and get a full augmented chord, which is pretty cool. So in our tuning, strings 2 and 3 here are root and 3rd. I'm basically going to flatten the 6th to make it a sharp 5. Then I get root 3 and sharp 5. usually happens in between the 5 and the 1. That's a little trickier and not quite as useful as the first one, but a neat thing. So, you know, play around with the tuning. I also do a lot more chord melody on an 8 string. You notice if I'm playing a melody on a 6 string, I might go. On an 8 string, I might play whatever notes happen to be underneath it and end up with. Which is kind of neat. So that's a lot of fun, you know. If you're gonna play old Hank Williams and old Bob Wills licks, you're gonna find this 6 tuning to be all over the place. You know, and you know sometimes on the records they may be way up high. On steel guitar they go way up high. You don't have to do that on a dobro. You can play it an octave down, but you know if you want them classic Hank Williams sounds, you go way up high. Which is why I had this extended fingerboard. I can see all the way up to the 24th fret. Very hanky. All right, well, that's about all I'm going to say right now. This is kind of just a crash course in what you can do with an 8-string dobro. If you want more information, get in touch with me. We'll talk about it.